The new CEO publicly fired me, calling me dead weight for daring to question him. He had no idea the woman he just humiliated was also his majority shareholder. The air in the office had been thick with the special kind of dread for weeks, the kind that smells like stale coffee, and desperation. It all started when our founder, a kind, brilliant man named Mr. Harrison, finally retired and sold his beloved company, Innovatech Solutions, to a large venture capital firm. They promised to honor his legacy, to nurture the creative spark he'd ignited. Instead, they sent us Caleb Vance. Caleb was 28 years old, the same age as me, but he walked around like he'd invented the silicon chip himself. He wore suits that cost more than my car, a watch that could probably pay my mortgage for a year, and a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. He spoke in a language I called LinkedIn buzzword bingo. Everything was about synergy, disruption, and optimizing verticals. He saw our company not as a collection of talented, passionate people, but as a series of assets and liabilities on a spreadsheet, and it quickly became clear that he viewed most of us as liabilities. I was a project manager, nothing fancy. I'd been with Innovatech for 5 years, working my way up from an entry-level coordinator. I loved this place. I believed in our work, in the products we were creating. It was more than just a job. It was the stable ground beneath my feet, the thing that let me provide for my 7-year-old son, Leo. Being a single mom is a constant tightrope walk, and this job was my safety net. What no one knew, not a single soul at Innovatech, was that my connection to the company ran much deeper. My late husband, Mark, had been a brilliant coder who passed away far too young. The life insurance payout was substantial, more money than I'd ever seen. After the grief subsided into a dull, constant ache, I knew I had to be smart with it, for Leo's future. I didn't want to just stick it in a bank. I wanted to invest in something I believed in, and I believed in Innovatech. So, through a series of lawyers and a blind trust managed by my financial advisor, I became a silent, anonymous investor, a majority shareholder, in fact. I bought Mr. Harrison's dream to protect it. I even took a job here, on my own merit, under my own name, just so I could have eyes on my investment and contribute in a real, tangible way. It was my secret, my nest egg, and my passion project all rolled into one. Caleb's reign began with a town hall meeting. He stood before us, all swagger and expensive cologne, and talked about trimming the fat and building a leaner, more agile machine. We all knew what that meant. Layoffs. The first round came a week later. Good people, friends of mine, were walked out with cardboard boxes, their faces a mixture of shock and shame. The office morale plummeted. My turn came during another all-hands meeting, about a month into Caleb's tenure. He was on stage, presenting his grand new vision for our flagship product. It was a disaster. He wanted to strip out its most beloved features, replace them with cheap, monetizable add-ons, and outsource the entire support division overseas. He was planning to gut the very soul of the company for a quick, short-term profit bump. I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. This wasn't just a bad business decision. It was a betrayal of everything Mr. Harrison had built, a betrayal of our loyal customers, and a betrayal of my investment, my life's savings, my son's future. My hand shot up before I could stop it. Caleb's eyes, cold and dismissive, landed on me. "A question?" he asked, dripping with condescension. "Yes, Caleb," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. "It's Alara, from Project Management. I've looked at the data from the last 3 user surveys. Over 80% of our core user base cited the features you're planning to cut as the primary reason for their loyalty. Have you factored in the projected customer churn and the long-term brand damage against the short-term savings from outsourcing?" The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. I had, in 2 sentences, completely dismantled the logic of his entire presentation, using our own data. A flicker of panic, then rage, crossed Caleb's face. He was publicly embarrassed, and he was not a man who handled that well. He stared at me, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "Ilara," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Thank you for that. Insight. It's that kind of thinking, that attachment to the old way of doing things, that is holding this company back. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. It's precisely the kind of redundancy we need to eliminate to become more agile. My blood ran cold. He wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of everyone. In fact, he continued, his voice booming through the microphone, let's make this an efficiency exercise in real time. Elara, your position is no longer required. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My colleagues stared, mouths agape, frozen in a mixture of fear and pity. My face burned with a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. I was just fired, in front of my entire company, for asking a smart question. I stood there for a second, paralyzed, before two security guards appeared at my side, their presence a final brutal confirmation of my dismissal. As they walked me through the silent, watching sea of my former co-workers, all I could think about was Leo. How would I tell him? How would I pay for his school, his clothes, our rent? The panic was a tightening band around my chest. I got to my desk, threw my few personal items, a picture of Leo, a mug he'd painted for me, a worn-out stress ball into a cardboard box, and was walked out of the building like a criminal. Standing on the curb, clutching that pathetic little box, the city's noise buzzing around me, the humiliation began to recede. It was replaced by something else, something cold, sharp, and absolutely furious. He didn't just fire a single mom. He didn't just fire a project manager. He fired his boss, and he had absolutely no idea. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, not from fear anymore, but from pure, unadulterated rage. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, David Chen, my lawyer and the trustee of my fund. He picked up on the second ring. Elara, is everything all right? I took a deep, steadying breath, the chaos of the street fading into the background as a singular, crystal-clear purpose formed in my mind. David, I said, my voice as calm and cold as ice. We have a problem. Caleb Vance, the new CEO of Innovatech, just terminated my employment, publicly. I paused, letting the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. I think it's time we called an emergency meeting with the board. I want to schedule a vote of no confidence. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. David Chen was a man who prized composure above all else. I had never heard him speechless before. He did what? He finally asked, his voice a low, dangerous hum. You heard me, David. He fired me in a town hall meeting, in front of the entire company, for questioning his strategy. I shifted the cardboard box to my other arm, my knuckles white. He called me redundant, an attachment to the old way of doing things. The arrogance is breathtaking, David murmured. Okay, Elara, an emergency meeting it is. The bylaws require 48 hours notice for the other board members. They won't like being summoned by an anonymous entity, but they have no choice. The vote of no confidence is a serious move. Are you absolutely certain this is the path you want to take? Once you do this, anonymity is no longer guaranteed. He's running my company into the ground, David, I said, my voice hardening. He's destroying my husband's legacy and my son's future. He humiliated me, but this is bigger than that. He's a parasite, and I want him out. Pull the trigger. Consider it pulled, he said, and the line went dead. The next 48 hours were a blur of nervous energy and clandestine preparation. I dropped Leo off at my mom's, telling her I'd been laid off but that I had a plan. I didn't want to worry her with the whole truth just yet. Her worried face was enough to fuel the fire in my belly. This wasn't just for me. It was for them. Back in my small apartment, I turned my dining table into a war room. I didn't just have access to the public data I'd cited in the meeting. As the majority shareholder, I had access to everything. Through David, I requested every internal report, every financial projection, every memo Caleb had sent since his arrival. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd feared. He was leveraging the company's assets for a series of high-risk short-term ventures designed to produce a spectacular quarterly report, after which the VC firm could flip the company for a quick profit, leaving the husk to collapse. He wasn't just trimming fat, he was performing a vivisection on a living entity, selling its organs one by one. I worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a righteous fury I hadn't felt in years. I compiled a dossier, a meticulous, damning case against him, complete with charts, internal emails, and a revised financial model showing the catastrophic long-term trajectory his plan would create. I was a project manager after all, and Caleb Vance was now my final, most important project. The morning of the board meeting, I sat at that same dining table, dressed not in a power suit, but in comfortable jeans and a simple sweater. I wouldn't be there in person. Not yet. David would be my voice, my proxy. I would be a ghost in the machine, listening in via a secure conference line. They're all here. David's voice came through my laptop speaker, calm and professional. Caleb looks like the cat that swallowed the canary. He has no idea what's coming. I heard the shuffling of papers, the clearing of throats. A stern voice, one I recognized from company photos as Ron Sterling, the head of the VC firm, spoke first. David, your client has called this highly unusual meeting. Let's get on with it. What is the issue? The issue, Mr. Sterling, David began, his tone formal, is a complete lack of faith in the current CEO, Mr. Caleb Vance. On behalf of the majority shareholder, I am formally calling for a vote of no confidence and his immediate removal. A scoff echoed through the speaker. It was Caleb. This is absurd, he said, his voice oozing with a smug confidence that made my skin crawl. This company was stagnating. I was brought in to make the tough decisions, to drive growth. This shareholder of yours is clearly an out-of-touch relic, someone who can't handle the pace of modern business. Perhaps they're friends with some of the dead weight I've had to clear out recently. My hand tightened into a fist. Dead weight. He was talking about me, about my friends. My client's touch is perfectly fine, Mr. Vance, David said coolly. What they object to is your plan to systematically devalue this company's core assets for a short-term payout. They object to your alienation of a loyal customer base and your abysmal leadership style. My leadership style gets results, Caleb shot back, his voice rising. I just terminated a disruptive employee in a public forum to prove a point about efficiency. It was a masterstroke. Morale among the real talent has never been higher. I almost choked. The sheer delusion was staggering. The other board members murmured their support for Caleb. They were his men. They'd chosen him. They were invested in his success, no matter how toxic his methods were. I could feel the tide turning against me. They were going to dismiss David, dismiss this anonymous challenge, and rubber-stamp Caleb's destructive agenda. I sent David a quick private text. It's time. Put me on. David cleared his throat, silencing the room. Gentlemen, it's clear you're not taking this seriously. You believe my client is, as Mr. Vance so eloquently put it, an out-of-touch relic. My client believes a more direct approach is needed. What are you talking about? Ron Sterling demanded. The shareholder I represent has been following your tenure very, very closely, Mr. Vance, David said, his voice dropping slightly, building the drama. In fact, they took a personal interest in your management style, especially your handling of personnel. Get to the point, Chen, Caleb snapped, impatience lacing his tone. Very well, David said. Mr. Vance, you mentioned recently terminating a project manager named Ilara Ross for asking a question during a town hall. The majority shareholder would like to address that decision with you personally. There was a moment of confused silence. Then, David unmuted my line. The soft hum of the active connection filled the boardroom. I took a deep breath, picturing Caleb's smug face, picturing my son's sleeping face, and I spoke, my voice coming through the conference room's main speaker, clear, cold, and utterly unmistakable. Hello, Caleb. It's the dead weight speaking. The silence that followed my words was so absolute, so profound. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. I could picture the scene perfectly. The polished mahogany table, the stunned faces of the board members, and Caleb, his confident smirk melting away like wax held to a flame. I imagined his eyes darting from the speakerphone to David Chen, his brain struggling to process the impossible. Ilara, he finally choked out, his voice a ghost of its former arrogance. What is this? What kind of pathetic trick are you trying to pull? No tricks, Caleb, I said, my voice remaining calm and level. Just business. The business you were hired to manage and are now actively destroying. You see, when my late husband passed away, he left me with more than just grief. He left me with the means to secure my son's future. I chose to invest that future in a company I believed in, a company Mr. Harrison built on innovation and integrity. I invested it all in Innovatech Solutions. Through a blind trust managed by Mr. Chen, I became the majority shareholder. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I could hear a sharp intake of breath, probably from Ron Sterling. Caleb was utterly silent. I took a job in project management to keep an eye on my investment, I continued, to be a part of the company I owned, to contribute from the ground up. I wanted to understand the day-to-day, the people, the culture. A culture you've poisoned in less than 2 months. The dead weight you fired in front of hundreds of people to make a point about efficiency happens to own 58% of this company's stock. Your boss. This is impossible, Caleb stammered. You're a project manager. You're a single mom. The contempt in his voice was still there, even through his shock, as if those two things disqualified me from ever holding any real power. I am both of those things, yes, I replied, and I'm also the person who is about to fire you, but not publicly. I have more class than that. Ron Sterling finally found his voice. Ms. Ross, he said, his tone a mix of disbelief and carefully controlled panic. If what you're saying is true, this is a highly unorthodox situation. Unorthodox situations arise from unorthodox leadership, Mr. Sterling, I shot back, quoting one of Caleb's favorite buzzwords. David is currently emailing each of you my full portfolio, authenticated by his law firm. While you review that, let me walk you through the dossier I prepared on Mr. Vance's performance. For the next 20 minutes, I systematically, dispassionately tore Caleb's entire strategy to shreds. I used their own internal data, their own projections. I laid out his plan to leverage company assets for risky side ventures. I exposed the emails where he callously referred to long-term employees as legacy costs. I detailed the catastrophic drop in employee morale, citing the spike in resignations from our top engineering talent since his arrival. I concluded with a revised financial model projecting that under his leadership, Innovatech would face insolvency within 18 months. When I finished, the silence was back, but this time it was heavy with understanding. The board members weren't Caleb's men anymore. They were businessmen, and they were looking at a balance sheet drenched in red ink. I trust you've all received the documentation from Mr. Chen, I said. The vote is on the table. A vote of no confidence in Caleb Vance, all in favor. David's voice cut in. The proxy for the majority shareholder votes aye. There was a beat of silence, and then Ron Sterling, his voice flat with resignation, said, The board votes aye. It was unanimous. It was over. Caleb, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, because even in my victory there was a bitter taste to it. Your employment at Innovatech is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Please be more dignified than I was. I heard a chair scrape violently against the floor and the sound of a door slamming shut. He was gone. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I had done it. I had protected my son's future. I had saved my company. Ms. Ross, Ron Sterling said, his voice now laced with a new, fawning respect. We apologize. We had no idea. We need to discuss the future of the company, the leadership. Perhaps you would consider taking the interim CEO position. The offer hung in the air, a tempting, glittering prize, the ultimate vindication. But the thought of it just made me tired. I wasn't a CEO. I was a project manager. A mom. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, but that won't be necessary, I said. I have a different plan. I took a deep breath. There's only one person who can lead Innovatech out of this mess. A man who understands its soul, who built its foundation. My first act as the active majority shareholder is to reinstate a former employee. Who? Sterling asked, intrigued. I'm not reinstating him as an employee, I clarified. I'm offering him the CEO position. Effective immediately, I want you to make a formal offer to Mr. Harrison. The shock in the room was palpable, even over the phone. Bringing the founder out of retirement? It was unprecedented. But it was the right move, the only move. He was the one person who could restore the faith of the employees and customers alike. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of Caleb's firing and Mr. Harrison's potential return spread through the company like wildfire. My name, Elara Ross, was suddenly on everyone's lips, whispered in hushed, incredulous tones. I was the secret queen who had overthrown the tyrant. It was surreal. Mr. Harrison accepted the position, his voice on the phone filled with a gruff, emotional gratitude that brought tears to my eyes. We were going to save Innovatech. A week later, I walked back into the office, not as a project manager, but as the owner, there to personally welcome Mr. Harrison back. People stopped and stared. Some applauded. It was overwhelming. As I stood in the lobby, waiting for Mr. Harrison to arrive, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from my financial advisor. I frowned, opening the email. It was a liquidity warning from the bank that held all of Innovatech's operating capital and lines of credit. My blood ran cold as I read the formal, legalistic text. Pursuant to the key person clause in your corporate financing agreement, the abrupt termination of CEO Caleb Vance constitutes a default event. All assets are hereby frozen, and all lines of credit are suspended pending a full review. I stared at the phone, the words blurring together. A key person clause. It was a common clause, tying the company's financing to a specific leader. The VC firm must have put it in Caleb's contract to protect their investment, and in my fury, in my righteous quest to oust him, neither I nor David had thought to check the fine print of the financing deal he'd signed. He wasn't just a parasite, he was a poison pill. By firing him, I had triggered the company's financial self-destruct sequence. We had no cash. We couldn't make payroll. We couldn't pay our vendors. I hadn't saved Innovatech. I had just signed its death warrant. The lobby, which had felt so warm and triumphant just seconds before, suddenly felt cavernous and cold. The applause faded into a dull roar in my ears. The email on my phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. We were frozen. All our accounts, every dollar we had for payroll, for rent, for the coffee in the break room, was locked away behind a legal clause I never knew existed. Caleb, even in his disgrace, had reached out from beyond his corporate grave to strangle the life out of the company. It was a perfectly executed, final act of spite. Just then the glass doors slid open and Mr. Harrison walked in. He was older, his hair whiter than I remembered, but his eyes still held the same intelligent spark. He saw the crowd, saw me, and a wide, genuine smile spread across his face. "Elara," he boomed, striding forward to shake my hand. "It's good to be back. Thank you for what you did." My own smile felt brittle, like a pane of cracked glass. "It's an honor to have you back, sir," I managed, my voice strained. "But we have a problem, a very big one." I led him to his old office, Caleb's briefly held office, and showed him the email. I watched as the color drained from his face, the triumphant energy of his return replaced by a familiar, weary weight. He sank into the large leather chair behind the desk, a chair that was rightfully his, and read the email again, his lips moving silently. "A key person clause," he finally whispered, looking up at me. "Tied to Vance. Sterling's VC firm must have insisted on it. It protects them if their hand-picked CEO is removed, makes the company's financing dependent on their guy staying in charge. It's a shark's move. By firing him, you triggered it." He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of impending failure. "They've cut off our oxygen, Elara. We can't make payroll next Friday. We're finished." The panic I'd held at bay threatened to swamp me. I saw my colleagues' faces, the people who had applauded me, who were counting on me. I saw Leo's face. I had gambled his future to save this company, only to lose it all on a technicality. The irony was suffocating. "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. I started pacing the length of the office, the adrenaline surging back, overriding the despair. "No, I did not come this far, to let that smug, incompetent child win. There has to be a way. We have the assets, we have the talent, we have the customers. We just don't have liquidity. And in business, liquidity is everything," Mr. Harrison said grimly. "The bank won't budge. Sterling and his firm hold all the cards. They'll let us suffocate, then buy back the company's assets from bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar. Caleb gets his golden parachute, and they get the company for a fraction of what they paid me for it. It's a perfectly legal, perfectly predatory strategy. I stopped pacing and stared at the city skyline through the large office window. He was right. We couldn't fight them on their terms. The legal and financial labyrinth was designed for them to win, so we had to change the terms. "What is the one thing they don't have, Mr. Harrison?" I asked, turning to face him. He looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "They have the money. They have the lawyers. They have the bank in their pocket," I said, a desperate, wild idea beginning to form in my mind. "But what do we have? Who do we have?" His eyes followed my gaze out toward the main office floor where employees were tentatively returning to their desks, whispering about the day's events. The spark in his eyes rekindled, brighter this time. He was beginning to understand. "Our people," he said, his voice quiet with awe. "Exactly," I affirmed. "Our greatest asset." Caleb never understood that. Sterling never understood that. To them, our employees are liabilities on a spreadsheet. But they're not. They're Innovatech. We called an immediate all-hands-on-deck emergency meeting. It was a somber affair. Mr. Harrison and I stood before the entire company, and we laid it all bare. We told them about the key person clause, the frozen accounts, the impending inability to make payroll. We told them we were, for all intents and purposes, bankrupt. The hope that had filled the room just hours before curdled into fear and despair. "I know this is devastating news," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "And I know I am the one who triggered this. I won't lie to you. The company as we know it is likely finished. Sterling's firm will pick over the bones, but they will only get the patents, the desks, the computers. They won't get the soul of this company, because the soul of this company is right here, in this room." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Harrison and I have been talking. We're going to start over. A new company. From scratch. We have no money. We have no office. All we have is an idea, a vision, and the people who made Innovatech great in the first place. We're calling it Phoenix Innovations. It's a risk, a huge risk. We can't promise you a paycheck next week. We can't promise you anything except a chance to build something new, something that is truly ours, free from the vultures and spreadsheet jockeys." I looked out at the sea of faces, my heart pounding. "I'm not asking you to stay. You all have families, mortgages, responsibilities. But for anyone who is willing to take this leap of faith with us, welcome to day one." For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence was deafening. I thought, I've failed. It was too much to ask. Then a senior engineer, a woman named Maria, whom Caleb had nearly driven to quit, stood up. "I'm in," she said, her voice ringing with defiance. Then another person stood, and another. Within a minute, the entire room was on its feet, a thunderous, defiant applause erupting, shaking the very walls of the dying company. They weren't just employees anymore. They were founders. The end of Innovatech was brutal and swift. We declared bankruptcy. Ron Sterling and his firm got the hollowed-out shell, just as Mr. Harrison predicted. But they got nothing of value, because on Monday morning, every single employee from the top engineers to the receptionists showed up to work at our new, temporary headquarters, a cavernous, rented co-working space downtown. We brought our knowledge, our client lists, our shared passion. I liquidated a portion of my personal assets, the safe, boring investments I'd kept separate, to provide a seed fund, enough to keep the lights on and pay for pizza while we worked around the clock. We were a startup again, fueled by passion and a shared sense of rebellion. And it was magical. Within 6 months, Phoenix Innovations had not only replicated our old product line, but we had improved it, launching a new flagship product that made waves in the industry. Our old clients, loyal to the people and not the name, flocked to us. About a year later, I was sitting in my new, much smaller office when David Chen forwarded me an article from a business journal. The headline read, "Innovatech Solutions officially dissolved. VC firm cites catastrophic asset devaluation following talent exodus." They had bought a name and a handful of patents, but the magic was gone. They were left with an empty building full of empty desks. Caleb Vance, the article noted, was last seen trying to launch a crypto-based wellness app that failed in 3 months. He'd become a cautionary tale, a footnote in our story of rebirth. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the bustling office of Phoenix Innovations. It was louder, messier, and more alive than Innovatech had ever been. We hadn't just survived. We had been reborn, stronger and more united than ever. I hadn't just saved my investment, I had invested in people, and in the end, that was the only asset that truly mattered.